Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome again. My name is Cui Fen, a student from the Faculty of Arts and Social Science. Thank you for being a part of You Alive today. Our program today will be split into three sections. The first would be a 10-minute talk by our speaker, Mr. Ngiam Tong Dow, followed by a 10-minute interview by Mr. Viswa Sadasivan, our chairman of the You Alive Organizing Committee. Lastly, we will have a 40-minute Q&A session. If you wish to ask a question, do kindly proceed to the microphones located along the aisle, speak into them directly, introduce yourself. This is important so that the online community is able to hear your question clearly. Thank you for your kind attention. Now, please sit back and enjoy.
You Alive.
You can be Harvard University, but who are you? If you don't know even how to fry an egg. Under our system, examination focused. You know, the top 200 boys, the top 200 girls, after PSLE, straight away they're given postings to RI and to RGS, the girls to RGS. So you're sending the top boys and girls to just two schools. But two schools only have two sets of teachers. And you just learn from two sets of teachers. In the world today, you never know when the problems are going to, what top problem are you going to face. So if you're only trained to face two types of problems, I think you'll be dead if a new problem comes along. So the real leadership in Singapore is not just defined by education. It's really defined by your grassroots, the hands-on approach. However bright, however high and mighty you think you are, how bright you are, the common man has the best wisdom. And if you only talk to him, listen to him, and be humble enough to accept his hand of friendship, I think you can get over quite a number of crises. What we should realize is that there's a difference between competence and brilliance. I think our universities teach us competence very well. All of us, all our engineers are competent, our accountants are competent. But whether they are brilliant or not depends on that little extra. And that little extra is, can you think out of the box? Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, my friends and fellow alumni. I can recognize any one or two alumni from my generation. I'm very glad to see much younger people today. Actually, my talk tonight is on seeding the future. And I picked up this topic because of two lessons I've learned in my career. The first lesson I learned is from Dr. Albert Winsemius. He was the economic advisor to Singapore. And he told me, he says, Ngiam, at that time, 30 years ago, I was the young admin officer carrying his bag along, all over the place. So he says, Ngiam, I can teach you how to drive a car. I can even teach you how to repair a car. But you have to drive the car yourself. It's a very telling lesson for me. That means Singaporeans have to be in the driver's seat. We cannot avoid that. And the second lesson I learned is actually at a banking conference. It was held in Seattle. And that day, Bill Gates was the speaker. So Bill Gates, of course, in half an hour, impressed us with his, he said, look, all this backroom work in banking, leave it to me. He said, I'm the expert of information systems. I'll do all this for you. You just concentrate on the front end of banking, your business, the business side. So after he left the room, the chairman of Barclays Bank, I cannot recall his name, but he was a short, bulldog kind of Englishman. He stood up and said, gentlemen, you better don't listen to this guy. He says, because if you allow him to do all the backroom processing, he'll soon learn all about our business, and he'll be taking us over. And therefore, this present trend of Singaporeans where every time we face a problem, we outsource, we subcontract. I think it's a bad trend. I think Singapore, we have to raise our own competence ourselves. That's my very firm belief. And that we should really grow our own timber. There's no other way. Nobody else can grow your own timber for you. I mean, you can bring in, and we need to bring in foreign technical talent, but we have to drive the state ourselves. That's a message I feel very strongly about. So you cannot escape from it. Otherwise, we become elite. That is, as I said, I mean, I hope I'm not too insulting, but I said once that our elite should not become one where we have impeccable taste, You bring us to a 5-star French Michelin restaurant, we're able to order the best wine, the best oysters and so on. But when a little voice whispers in your ear, sir, can you fry me an omelette? You don't know where to start. I think an elite cannot go that way. If you study history, empires have fallen because the elites have become effete. So we must never have an elite that's effete. So my whole theme this evening is how to secure our future. Well, to secure our future, we need to seed it first. In the new millennium, competition will be knowledge intensive and not resource based. Let me begin with a quote from an article entitled Higher Education Superpower, written by a journalist, Mr. David Ignatius, of the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal edition of 12 March 2007. He wrote, when people talk about American power in the world, they usually list the country's forbidding arsenal of bombers, aircraft carriers, and troops. Yet, America's strategic asset these days might not be its guns, but its universities. Mr. Ignatius' quote brought my mind back to 1976, when the Singapore delegation led by Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew visited an engineering laboratory at Peking University. Our Chinese host told us that to overcome the strategic embargo imposed by the Americans, the scientists and engineers were engaged in designing and building China's first supercomputer. A decade later, I read in the press that China had built a supercomputer faster than the American Cray. Today, the race for the fastest computers is between the US, China, and Japan. So this evening, I'd like to propose that we apply our minds to two critical issues. First, how do we go about seeding Singapore's economic future? Second, how do we ignite the spirit of wealth creation in the minds of our young? I agree with Mr. Ignatius that universities and polytechnics are indeed a country's strategic assets, and even more so for Singapore than other states, because other states have wealth of natural resources and abundance of manpower. I do not have the statistic, but I will not be far wrong to claim that Singapore's per capita spending on tertiary education is among the highest, if not the highest in the world. Investment in education, however, only enhances knowledge. Knowledge raises the potential of undergraduates. But knowledge is power only when applied with discernment, and potential has to be manifested in performance. At the recent 2012 NUS commencement, 6,000 graduates and 3,000 postgraduates received their degrees. As I handed out the scrolls to the graduating class of the arts and science faculties, I wondered to myself, how many of our young graduates will become wealth creators? A century ago, poor young men left the impoverished homelands of China and India to seek a livelihood in the newly founded British colony of Singapore. They were men with little formal education. A fortunate few, through grit and tenacity, amassed fortunes. The recently announced plans to exhume the graves at the Bukit Brown Cemetery for redevelopment reminds us of some of our patriarchs who built early Singapore in Singapore. But the question to ask is that in a global knowledge-based world, can the great-grandchildren succeed through sheer tenacity and grit alone? Mr. Ignatius' writing gives much food for thought. I believe that in the 21st century, we have to take a structured, disciplined approach to wealth creation. It can no longer be left to chance. A random hit or miss process will not do. So where do we begin? As Mr. Ignatius has suggested, we have to begin at our universities and polytechnics for the simple reason that the core role of tertiary institutions is to teach and impart knowledge. I propose that as part of their final year curriculum, students will be encouraged to form project teams of 2 or 3 from the same or across faculties. The project teams will propose what they conceive to be viable businesses using new or significantly improved technology and processes. Project teams have to demonstrate beyond a shadow of doubt that their ideas are authentic and original. Olivia Lam, NUS alumnus, established HyFlux, a leading water treatment company, only after she had researched and improved the efficacy of a desalinization process using membrane technology. I invited Olivia to speak at one of EDB's breakfast talks, and this is her story. She was an orphan, born in Perak, and she was so bright that the principal told her, Olivia, you better go to Singapore because you are too good for my school, too good for my school. So she came to Singapore, and she worked as a waitress and stayed with the Samsui women in Sagulin. Then she graduated in chemistry from NUS and joined, I think, Glaxo, one of the pharmaceutical companies. But one day she told herself, I just don't want to be an employee, I want to start something of my own. So what did she do? She sold her apartment, she sold a car, bought herself a motorbike, and started to distribute chemicals by motorbike. And this is something which she has not told many people, but she says that at university, her sponsors were, and she raised $100,000 by doing all that. The other $200,000 came from 2 faculty members of the chemistry department. She won't tell me who they are anyway. I think the faculty supported her with equity capital to start HyFlux. And HyFlux today is one of the world's leading water treatment company. That is the Olivia Lam story. The second story I'd like to tell you is Mr. Sam Gui, the Popiah King. So, Sam is not our alumnus, but he's from the Singapore Polytechnic. And being Chinese educated, he had attended Polytechnic, he could not attend NUS. So he graduated in mechanical engineering. So when I graduated, his father, who ran a provision shop in Tampines, told him, Sam, now that you're a graduate, can you take over my business, provision shop business? So the son told the father, he said, Dad, I didn't go to Polytechnic just to run your provision shop, you know. He's that kind of a man. So what did he do? He borrowed, I think, about $50,000 from his father to start a mechanical workshop, repairing things, making things. And after 6 months, he lost every cent. So he dared not go back to the father. So he got hold of his father's best friend and asked the best friend to borrow another $50,000 for him. So he got another $50,000, and then he succeeded with his teacher. Even the teacher story is a story of enterprise, because teacher actually belongs to another company, the Popia making companies. So he went to see the old man and said, look, it's so tedious for you to make the Popia by hand. You know? He said, why don't I invent for you a machine to make Popia mechanically? So the old man told him, so the young man, okay, you are so clever, you can try. So after a few months, he brought back a machine to the old man. The old man says, but I have no money to pay you. Then Sam, he's really angry. He said, no, in that case, Mr. So-and-so, you give me half the shares of your company. And he also put in a condition that this old man cannot start another company of the same trade. And that's how Sam started his Popia skin business. They went to Prata Skin, and today Sam is, I think, if I'm not mistaken, almost a billionaire. Anyway, I don't know how much money he has. But this is the sort of enterprise, you know. But startup companies, I think, have a better chance of success if the key founding partners combine complementary skill sets. That's why I suggested that NUS students should form two teams of 2 or 3 from the same faculty across faculties. If you study the history of outstanding industrial companies such as Hewlett-Packard and Sony, they were founded by partners who complemented each other. I think Hewlett-Packard was Mr. Hewlett, the engineer, and Mr. Packard, the salesman. Similarly with Sony, I can't remember the engineer was, but Mr. Morita was actually a super salesman. So you must have 2 skills, technology combined with commerce. Then I think you have a good chance of success. And Yong Lin Leong told me that the successful entrepreneurs, that the infant mortality rate among startups is highest in the initial 2 or 3 years. Without a product or service ready for the market, tight cash flows is a constant challenge for the fledgling startup. You ask Yong Lin Leong. His company was a startup. He said the first 2 years were the hardest because your cash flow was very tight. You never know that the next morning your company will be bankrupt. So he says you must control your cash flow. Despite the Herculean efforts of the EDB's Light Industry Service Unit in the 1970s, EDB found it heavy going to process and approve more than a dozen loans to SMEs each year. As bureaucrats, we were risk averse. So at a lunch with our chancellor then, Mr. Dr. Tony Tan, then in his capacity as chairman of the Association of Banks, I proposed that the 4 Singapore banks join EDB in implementing the Light Industries Finance Scheme. The Ministry of Finance, through EDB, will extend a line of credit to the banks, and they can on-lend to SMEs with the lending bank sharing half the risk. That's very important, sharing half the risk. When I left EDB 3 years later, the LIS portfolio of 3,000 loans incurred a non-performing loan ratio of only 3%, in fact lower than the overall NPL ratio of the banks. The LIS succeeded largely because it was decentralized. It was a good example of decentralization where people who knew the business did the business and not run by some bureaucrats. But LFS loans, though necessary, are not sufficient for seeding growth. To seed the growth of new industrial enterprises, the state has to play an entrepreneurial role, taking risks alongside the private sector. That actually is my main message. Those who take a dim view of state capitalism, at least of Singapore, should ask ourselves where Singapore would be without the Minister of Finance providing equity capital to SIA, Capital Corporation, Sembcorp, ST Engineering, and indeed even DBS Bank, of which I was the chairman once. Few people remember that the Minister was a founding shareholder in our two leading hotels, the Mandarin and the Shangri-La Hotel. That means the Singapore government in the early days, we shared the risk with the entrepreneur. We didn't give them loans, but equity, we shared the risk with you. And that's very important. So my modest proposal is for the Ministry of Finance to extend a $100 million grant to EDB to invest in the equity of, say, 1,000 or 100 knowledge-based startup companies germinated in our 4 universities and 6 polytechnics. Soon it will be 6 universities. Incidentally, the EDB was established in 1961 with a grant of $100 million only, to seed, that was the term used, to seed the economic growth of Singapore. That's why my team is seeding the future. That is succeeded is for all to see. My plea, in fact, I'm going to write to Mr. Heng Swee Keat after tonight to ask him for the Minister of Finance to continue seeding our economy by sharing the risk, not just lending the money, through equity participation alongside private enterprise. For a small state like Singapore, this to me is a viable strategy to compete with the giant BRIC economies with the abundance of natural resources and manpower. The BRIC countries are Brazil, Russia, India, China. I think tomorrow will be South Africa, and maybe Indonesia. We cannot compete with them on natural resources. We can't compete with them on manpower. But the little red dot of Singapore, we can compete with them, in my view, on knowledge. And that is why I think the universities come in. In a highly competitive, knowledge-based global economy, actually our universities and polytechnics are the only strategic assets we have. We don't have other strategic. So all of you in the universities today, you are our future. You are a strategic asset which we have to mobilize for Singapore to advance. If we don't do this, I think Singapore will soon revert back to the 1950s when I grew up. I think most of you will not know what 1950s was like. I think maybe in the room, maybe only 1 or 2 remember. Maybe Edward De Silva can remember. The 1960s, 50s was a Singapore that most of us, I recall with a shudder. Joblessness, slum housing, bad sanitation, petty crime. And I think, I'm not a cynic, but I'm quite skeptical, that without a knowledge-based growth strategy, all the glitz and glamour of the new Singapore we enjoy today may well turn out to be a mirage, a footnote in world history. So that really is my hope and my fear, that if we do not become a knowledge-based economy, we may just go back to the 1950s. The only boom then was the Korean War boom. After that, we were stagnating. So when the PAP government took over, came part in 1959, we inherited a stagnant economy, slum housing, and all the ills, So I think we have to adopt the right strategy. And I think my partner, or rather my interlocutor, I invite him now, Viswa. I told him that he can be the interlocutor, but he should not interrogate me. So I think Singapore must adopt the right strategy. So now I hand over to Viswa.
Thank you.
Because that is your subject.
Thank you. So, would you say, Mr. Ngiam, that you are a wealth creator or wealth manager?
I believe in wealth creation.
But are you, today, are you a wealth creator or a wealth manager?
I've got to debate your question.
In local parlance, we call that Tai Chi.
No.
But really, what do you think you are?
Actually,
you've come up with fairly
if
revolutionary
I have to
ideas.
start my life again. No, let me tell you, it's not an excuse. But I came from a very poor family. So my whole job of going to university is to get a job. And in those early days, there were only two good employers, I must say. First was Shell, and second was the Singapore government. And I chose the Singapore government. And sometimes I wonder whether it was the right decision. Anyway, that's another story. So I think I can be but I do not know whether I have the temperament to be a wealth creator. Now let me tell you what Joe Pillay told me, my colleague. Joe Pillay, he says, Ngiam, you and I, we are just, bureaucrats. So I asked him, what do you mean? He said, we cannot be businessmen. Because he said, as a businessman, you have to be able to let your customers spit you in your face, and you keep on smiling. So Joe asked me, Tong Dow, you think you can do that? It's a tough question to answer. Okay, that's my question.
Mr. Ngiam, among all the things that you've said, one of the things that struck me the most is your concept of wealth creation and wealth management.
Yeah.
I think it strikes at the very foundation of some of the problems we might be facing today. So let me recast the question.
Yeah, okay.
Do you think Mr. Lee Kuan Yew is a wealth creator or a wealth manager?
Lee Kuan Yew is a political creator.
No. Wealth.
Goh Keng Swee is a wealth creator, I can
Okay.
tell you that. I mean, in the first cabinet, Lee Kuan Yew is what I call the Moses, but Goh Keng Swee was a Joshua.
Okay. So it is possible for you to be a wealth creator even in government.
Yes?
So it's an attitude, not so much the context, right?
I tell you, in the government, I think I would say that if you have worked in EDB, you have got a wealth creation attitude. And I was lucky in a way, because Dr. Goh told me that you are very lucky to work for me. He told me once. He said, we have worked for the other part of finance ministry, which is the traditional treasury. He said, you have learned nothing. Says in EDB, we are not regulators. We are actually the supplicants. And it's quite a different attitude. If you have to be a salesman and a buyer are quite two different. The normal civil servant is a buyer. So he dispenses favors, he regulates you. When we work for EDB and the other organizations similar, you are a seller. And selling is much tougher than buying, Although the present brouhaha about bicycles may not be so simple. But anyway.
It's not just bicycles, it's chairs, it's a whole lot of things.
But let me tell you, Chan Chin Bok, my EDB colleague, my co-chairman, he said he's our best salesman, I would say. So Chin Bok told me that to do investment promotion, to attract people to invest in Singapore, he says the ratio goes something. We have to make 100 phone calls, 100 cold calls, they call it.
Cold calls, yeah.
And of the 100, you are lucky if the secretary to the CEO give you a reply. So in America, 10 of the American CEOs out of 100, they say, okay, come along and have tea with me. And Chin Bok says, if you go and see him, you are very lucky if you get one. So the success ratio is 1 in 100.
But it took a certain amount of attitude, a certain
Yeah,
amount of determination.
it's food.
And that is a constant, regardless of whether it's the 1950s, 70s, or today.
Yes, and
Would you
even now.
agree? Now, if that is the case, why are we facing some of the issues we are today that you are pointing out, quite correctly? Do you think that if you had pointed out some of these things while you were in office, we may have been able to prevent where we are today?
While I was in the service, I pointed out all these problems. That there is much. In fact, I proposed to the finance ministry that every admin officer should start his life in what I call the service ministries. That means EDB, HDB. Start with that.
The supplicant ministries.
The supplicant ministries. Although the word supplicant, I'm not. We are not beggars, But if you start on the other side, you learn nothing, because the whole structure of government, the British structure is that one minister, one perm sec. Okay, that's fair. One perm sec, there are 2 deputy secretaries. Each of the deputy secretaries has got 3 principal assistant secretaries, and each of them has another 3 assistant secretaries, and so on. So in the end, in fact, as Dr. Goh says, you are lucky to work for me, because when I was in his ministry, he was minister, consistent was my perm sec, and I was the only dog body, the assistant secretary, so you are lucky. But if you have worked on the other side, you never ever have to write a letter. All that you do is to sign. The HEOs of the ministries, which is below actually the admin service, they will draft all the beautiful letters for you, and you just sign, Ngiam Tong Dow.
So,
but what have you learned? You have learned
nothing.
0. So that's why I always advocate that any admin officer should start life in the quote unquote supplicant ministry. Don't go and start life in the regulatory ministry.
Yeah. Now, would you say that many of these ideas that you brought up, some of the others in the civil service, senior civil servants, may have also brought up? I mean, the need for us to review, the need for us to change. But why was there resistance on the part of the political leadership? You said you brought them up, but it didn't happen.
I'll give an example. I was chairman of Singapore Telephone Board.
Singapore
Telephone Board.
Telephone Board, yeah.
In 1970 to 72, I think. At that time, STB, we let out a tender for exchange equipment. I'm not an engineer, but it's from step equipment to the new one. And lo and behold, of course, as expected, the Singapore tender, the top 1, 2, 3 were all Japanese companies. And at the same time, I read in the Straits Times that in South Korea, the winner was an American company, AT&T. So I called up the manager of CEO. I said, look, how can you Japanese lose to the Americans in South Korea? He said, no, Mr. Ngiam, we didn't lose to them. We did not even tender. So I said, because the Americans were prepared to transfer technology to the South Koreans. But what I call the Japanese will not. And therefore, they will rather not transfer technology than to take part in the tender. And Samsung, that's the beginning of Samsung. Because the South Koreans were prepared to pay for technology at a higher price to AT&T. Today you have Samsung, which is contesting with Apple. But Singapore, our rule was that no, we have to give the tender to the lowest tenderer. And of course, the lowest price are the Japanese. So we did not think long term at all. We just went by commercial consideration.
Did the civil servants bring this up?
I did, and I was scolded for it. I mean, I don't want to tell who scolded me. By the way, I was scolded for
Mr.
it.
Ngiam, you shared with me when we had a chat before about the contest of ideas that you had with Mr. Lee Kuan Yew on the implementation of COEs. Would you want to share that with the audience here?
But let me tell you that Mr. Lee actually in private conversation, he is not the samurai that you see. He's actually a very reasonable person. And as his PMSEC PSPMO, he used to invite me for lunch twice a year, just one-on-one. No? One-on-one. And he always begins the lunch by telling me, look, Ngiam, today we're having lunch. I'm not the Prime Minister, you're not a PMSEC. We are intellectual equals. That really set the whole tone. So you can argue your case, and he can argue his case. If you're wrong, he also give you a punch, but you can also tell him what he feels. See? So I remember very well COE was the discussion, you know. And it went like this. I said, CO, just like housing, just like HDB housing, I said the COE was actually a means of controlling. Actually, the origin started with road planning. I was communication, MND, I think. And we calculated with Lim Leong Gyok, who was the CEO of the MRTC, or rather the chief road engineer. He said every year our road capacity will can increase to accommodate another 30,000 vehicles. So it was a matter of how to allocate these 30,000 licenses. You know? So being the socialist, I told PM, I said, look, 30,000 licenses, we should ballot it out, because we should ballot it to the Singaporean who has done national service, who has worked for 3 years, paid income tax, and maybe in those days I didn't include that you must be married. so I said we should ballot these 30,000 licenses to our young people coming up. Not if you're already a car owner, you don't. Only those who are not car owners, you can ballot for it. And we calculated that in fact 30,000 a year, at most you have to wait is about 3 years before you get a license, you know. And I thought just like HDB flats, we balloted for it in the early days, you know. We didn't bid for it. So I took this idea to. So when PM Lee Kuan Yew had lunch, I told him, I said, look, this 30,000 as an economist, no matter how to allocate 30,000 scarce licenses. So I told him it's best to ballot. Then he looked at me. He says, "No, pricing is better. You're an economist. How can you not believe in pricing? No, you're asking me to ration." I said, "No, I'm not asking." So I said, "Sir, if you want to use pricing, the COE will go through the roof one day. In fact, the COE is nothing more than paying tax 10 years in advance. That's about it. It'll go through the roof, and the transport cost pervades throughout the whole economy, affects everybody, you know." Huh? Then he looked at me and said, "Ngiam," so I said, "It'll go through the roof." So he looked at me and said, "Ngiam, are you the PMSEC of revenue or not?" So I said, "Yes, of course I am." He said, "Why are you objecting to more revenue?" So I think, until today, I think I'm right and he's wrong. No, frankly speaking, yeah, I think we should have balloted. Otherwise, I think transport costs in Singapore will keep on rising and rising, you know, and it's not even fair.
Yeah.
You know, so that's a
it's quite clear that
quote unquote inside story, but it's a matter of economic philosophy. As I said, in that case, I was a socialist and he was a capitalist.
it's quite clear that you are equals just intellectually.
Yes, Mr. Lee always.
Yeah. But in the end, he still called the shots.
No, but of course, as a PMSEC, I got to obey him, lah.
Yeah.
But I think in the long run, you think about it. Is it a balloting system better, or is it a pricing system better? I think the purists will say pricing. But I say that.
I think that the lesson here is, number one, There was contest of
contest,
of ideas.
yes,
There was
yes, of
contest of
course.
ideas. Whether it amounts to anything that you wanted, that's besides the point. But there was contest.
Definitely
There were individuals who had the courage to contest.
Well, at least
But over the years, I think there's a sense that the number of the critical mass of individuals with that courage to contest may not be strong.
No.
What is your view on that?
No, don't put those words in my mouth.
No. I'm not putting your. I'm saying there's a general sense that over the years we've become soft. I mean, we are reading about that. Now, is that valid in your view?
No,
Or do you think
I can
that's
tell you that as far as the first generation government, I think they are very open-minded. If you are a PERMSEC or you are a civil servant, you can tell Dr. Goh, you can tell Lee Kuan Yew, you can tell Rajaratnam what you feel. And I can tell you, actually, one of the qualities of PM Lee Kuan Yew is that he's a great integrator. No? I've seen him in cabinet. He will ask the views of all the ministers on this issue. What is your view? And then he listens very carefully. And then he integrates, or rather he's a lawyer, I think. He blends all the views into a coherent whole, politically acceptable. That is his art. That is Lee Kuan Yew's great ability, coherent whole. And then he will ask Mr. Rajaratnam, he said, Raja, can you go upstairs and knock up a draft for us to consider? And Raja will go upstairs. 15 minutes, he comes down with his draft, In the meantime, having a smoke outside. And then he circulated the draft to all the ministers. He said, okay, gentlemen, we agree to this position. And then PMO releases the press statement on policy. So today, I don't want to, second guess the younger, but I think today, I do not see why policy should be announced at strict corners. A policy is very important. It must always be issued through the PMO, the Prime Minister's office. So when he speaks for the whole government. So today, when ministers go around, walk about, give statements, that's why I've now retired from the civil service. I can't take that kind of government.
Okay, on that note, maybe we can throw it open to the floor for questions, comments, and as I am compelled to say regularly, no speeches. Yes, sir. It's our regular.
Oh. My name is Tan Chi Ping, graduate of the University of Malaya then, back in 1955.
Yes, Doctor. Yeah.
I just want to know from you, when we were kicked out from Malaysia, and then we have no resources. So the Tengku and all that probably think that, let's wait, maybe 1 or 2 months later, Singapore will come down, kowtow and ask to be taken back. Because we lack the hinterland, so to speak. But on hindsight, with this new internet and so on, the world is our market. Therefore, we don't have to be constrained by the lack of resources, right? So therefore, notwithstanding what the economists are all thinking and all that, Lee Kuan Yew stuck fast to his own way and see we will find a way out, right? Okay. So now, you mentioned the other day that this Oliver Lam and so on don't have the startup money. So I was thinking, is there any case to have a Singapore to start up some of those venture capitals, those who can see your proposal and then invest 10,000, 100,000, whatever it is in this. And also you need some so-called angels who are all fit with all your industry and so on.
I think that's already big. There are already private venture capital companies, and they do finance private projects.
Ko Bun Hui, I think, is one of them.
But I think talking about separation, in Singapore, I would say, in 1965 when we separated from Malaysia, all of a sudden we lost the prospect of the Malaysian common market. And I think Dr. Goh and Lee Kuan Yew They provide great leadership. They say, you know, we will now have to compete with the rest of the world, with everybody. And that's why I think Singapore is the first global economy. We dismantled all our import tariffs. We knew that import substitution was nonsense for an economy like Singapore. And Singapore, in a way, became the world's first global economy. So today, we're in the same position. But today, you have to compete with the BRIC countries. And therefore, I think we must compete on knowledge. And that is why I think our universities are strategic assets. We have to mobilize our universities, our polytechnics. Because import substitution as a policy is only meant for big countries. And in fact, it's a dead end, frankly speaking. Even the economic theories of the 50s, you know, especially the UN economists, no, they went around preaching import substitution, which is a mistake. Actually, all countries should have gone for open competition like today. And that's how when China opened up, I think when India opens up, it's just like, you know, releasing all the potential, and the economy took off. But when they were state economies, they couldn't grow. So I think Singapore, I would say, of course you can say we had no choice. But I think as far as venture capital, there is venture capital. But my point is, we need to be more organized. I think if we believe that knowledge is the thing, then I think let's begin at the university. I think the students can gather around. A professor in a particular field can be the mentor, and then they propose projects. $1 million equity capital.
Yeah.
You can get from your colleagues or whatever another $1 million. We won't even insist on. I think we should not insist on dollar for dollar, which is the normal Singapore government instinct. But I think we must allow our young people to start up.
Okay.
Based on knowledge. So this is really my point. We are in a different world, no?
I know.
Okay.
Can I suggest that we institutionalize by having...
No, that I leave
See,
it to...
the problem of institutionalization, if I could just intervene, you know, is something that I gather from Mr. Ngiam's earlier statement, points to the dichotomy between competence and brilliance. You know, I think we are in the habit of institutionalizing or over-institutionalizing things. It's almost like, I recall a minister some time back saying, we believe very much in spontaneity, which is why we plan for it. You know, I think we are at risk of moving into over-planning and over-institutionalization.
Nothing.
You know, and maybe we want a little bit more of spontaneity. You know, and on that score, if I could just ask a follow-up question, if I could bring the discussion to what seems to be at the bedrock, which is really the way we are trained to think or not think as a people, whether it's formal education or non-formal education, you know. I think that's where the root of a lot of these issues actually start. I mean, that's where the root is, isn't it? So if I could ask you a simple question. You talked just now, Mr. Ngiam, about elitism. I'm saying this, I have the license to say this because I went to RI, okay? And you are absolutely right. When you go to Raffles Institution, you are made aware from the time you are 13 on a regular basis by every teacher and the principal that you are the cream of the crop. No, from a tender age of 13. And I believe the same with RGS. And this is ingrained in you that you're special. And that is not a good thing because it creates an elitist model, an elitist thinking, and it leads to complacency.
Now, let me tell you a little story to answer you. This was told to me actually by a British officer. No? He says, in the kingdom of the crows, before the young crows can become admitted into society, he must face a council of elders. So the first young crow came up, he was asked, what do you think is the most dangerous thing for a young crow? So he says, the most dangerous thing, sir, is an arrow, because an arrow can kill me. Then the next chap came up, Same question, he said, oh, the arrow having been used, is the bow can propel the arrow to shoot you, to kill you. And the third check came out, no more arrow, no more bow. And his answer was, a bad archer. So Singapore, we better learn not just to anticipate arrows and bows, we better learn to deal with bad archers. You never know in the world today. There's a term called black swan events. Bad archers. This is what our education, we should teach us to deal with bad archers.
Yep.
That's very, very important. So I think that's why I think we need to be, that's why I believe in diversity.
Yeah. So one of the points that you had raised in line with this is that we probably want to spread the goodies a little bit more. Instead of sending all of them to RI and RGS
I think
and
maybe
creating,
maybe
you were
today,
talking about
maybe
a high plateau as opposed to many peaks, right?
Maybe today they may not do it, but definitely during the 70s, 80s, Kong Wah was a pump server. He told me this is all very simple. PSLE results come out, first 200 listed boys. The ministry will write to the parents and say, would your son like to go to RI? Which parent will not want the son to go to RI? And similarly for the girls. So they pick up the kids. So I'm not saying that they don't deserve to go RI, they do. But you are being taught by just two sets of teachers. And you can only deal with the regular problems of the world. You cannot deal with a bad archer. And I think Singapore, we've got to learn to deal with a bad archer. That's my whole point about diversity, And I think we have to be.
So what's your recommendation? What do you think can be done right now? What needs to be changed?
I think today I noticed that I don't think the MOE sends people there, but the school now they compete, because when my grandson was going to pass his PSL, he received letters from RI, letters from ACS, I think letters from Walchong. So now the schools are competing. It's not being allocated, so to speak, by the ministry. But I think we should spread our talent. That's the whole point of coming to talent again. That's what I told Mr. Lee Kuan Yew once also. I say when 10 present scholars come home, you should not just admit all of them into the admin service. He said the 5 who stand on your right, being righties, they should join the Singapore government. The 5 on the left, being lefties, they should go into business. I think we should spread the talent. But then of course he.
But there's a high risk that those on the left may fail.
No, never mind. But he looked at me, he says, Ngiam, do you think you have enough talent? You mean tell me you have so much talent you can spare the talent? I said, sir, no, we will never have enough talent. But the whole idea is to spread our brains throughout society and not just the administration. I think that makes for a stronger Singapore. We should allow our scholars to work, actually, so long as they doesn't emigrate, he should work for Singapore, And you can even free him of his bond if you like, but work for Singapore. That is my, because Singapore, in any case in the global world, we have to think of the nation of Singapore. The nation of Singapore is bigger than the country of Singapore. Look at Israel. Israel only has 6 million people who live in Israel.
Reside.
Right? But they have, 21 million people all over the world. So I think we must have a global Singaporean, so to speak. And that's the only way for us to survive. Global Singapore.
Okay.
Could I just one comment?
A quick one.
Could it be the fault lies with our inheritance from the British system?
Don't blame the British for all. I would say this, I have to say for the British, if I have to be colonized, I would rather be colonized by the British than by the French or by the Belgians.
But I think the education ministry ought to send a mission to study all this education system.
But we do that all the time.
All the time. Then you adopt the best point, the advantageous point for our youth.
Okay, thank you. Can we have quick comments? Yes. You want to introduce yourself now?
Yes. Hi, my name is Valerie, and I am the online chat moderator here for You Alive. So we've got a question here from our website that was left earlier, and I'll just read it out for you. It was left by a user named Bridget Shu, and she wants to ask a question about leadership. Right. So she says, leaders have to decide on what is good and what is right, and this is often contentious. During your time in various leadership positions, how do you decide for a large number of people what is right and what is good for them and or the state? What are your leadership philosophies, and what do you see as the key leadership challenge for Singapore at the present and in the future?
Got the question?
Should I repeat that?
I think leaders, in my view, will emerge naturally. I prefer leaders to emerge naturally. If I can think about leadership in Singapore, there are leaders at every level of society. In a clan association, somebody will emerge as leader. In a business organization, and so on. Political leadership, of course, parliamentary, democratic elections. But let me put it in a more philosophical way. You know, the French, I think we might study the idea. The French have an école de l'administration, you know, and the best and brightest of French young people, they go to that. They call it ENA, E-N-A. They study there, and then they become an ENAC. But when they graduate, the French are quite remarkable. One brilliant chap may join the Socialist Party. Another brilliant chap may join the Conservative. One chap may join the business. One chap may join education, university, or I think even the priesthood. I don't know. But one thing which the French have learned is that whichever party you belong to, there is only one France. You have to, and all of them agree, there's one, and we always act in the interest of France. So we can have diversity in unity. I think politics in Singapore should not be, either you're for me or against me. We should believe in one Singapore, one France. I think Singapore, we should really study the French, the ENAC. I mean, the French haven't spoken up very much, but I think we should study. The French elite comes from the same college, ENA. But they will serve different parts of society. And France, I think, is quite a stable country and doing quite well. So I think maybe, I hope that our leadership in Singapore will come up to be that kind of leadership.
So what's holding our leadership back from moving in that direction to allow for diversity in a healthy way? What's holding it back?
First, I said, let the talent be spread.
Is it just caused by that? Or is there...
Not necessarily, but I think we must think of the nation of Singapore. You see, I have written in one of my articles, Plato's Republic. If you read Plato's Republic, at first it is a very persuasive piece of political philosophy. In Plato's Republic, so the young people join in one cohort. And then each cohort will elect the leader. And then the leaders all go up, until finally the philosopher king. The philosopher king. So in fact, I read that Republic, and I tell you, I was, in one night, I was so enthralled with this concept of government by the enlightened. And then in the end, I asked myself the question, but what happens if the philosopher king becomes mad? Only God can remove him. So I rejected the whole philosophy of the Republic. I rejected it because that is dictatorship. I think democracy is a much better system. I mean, you can, of course, it's not so tidy. It's sometimes very chaotic, but at least in a way, quote unquote, is the will of the people. Is it?
Okay, next question. Comment? I know for some of you this may be very abstract. Yes. We would need you to go to the mic because the rest can't hear you. And introduce yourself if you don't mind.
Hi, my name is Andre, and I'm from Indonesia. Now I have a question for you regarding knowledge and talents. You mentioned that Singapore, the new age, will need new skills and to make themselves competent. But now you have, what I'm trying to say is, more people are studying in universities instead of skill-based schools like ITE and polytechnics. So, and you also have an influx of immigrants, which bring in diversity and culture and also talents from their own respective countries. So how do you think Singaporeans today will deal with these two areas, which one is influx of pool talents, and also the other one is more graduates comparing to skill-based workers, for instance? Thank you.
The question was asked whether we're producing too many graduates.
Instead of, I mean, most of them, the leaders are coming through the university system and not the IT polys. And second part of it is the influx of foreigners, right?
Yes,
and how are we dealing with both?
How can the Singaporeans today, the new generation, to deal with these two challenges, if I may say?
Well, I go back to a bit of history. Actually, our first advisor in technology was Dr. Pannenbock of Philips of the Netherlands. He was the first technology advisor. So he told us that, look, Singapore, forget about cutting edge research. He says what we want is to raise your level of competence. Level of competence. So if you have the engineers, you have the accountants, you will naturally attract the MNCs and other investors come to you. So if you have got a skill, people will come. It's a supply, induced demand. And I think he's right, because Singapore, we cannot say that we are rocket scientists, but I think we are competent. And therefore, we've got some very good industries. But we have to. I think our university, we should train that kind of people. And secondly, I think in our EDB, and we have the Industrial Training Center, what is now the ITE. And the late Ong Wee Hock was my colleague. He was in charge of this. So the ITEs were taking in actually our school dropouts. Those guys who can't finish O-level, school dropouts. So one day I told Wee Hock, I said, look, Wee Hock, you're asking me to throw pearls before swines. Oh, Wee Hock was very angry with me. He said, Mr. Ngiam, you are very wrong, And I tell you, I was wrong, because at that level, when they are practice-oriented, in fact, you look at the Singapore entrepreneurship, they are mostly the ITE boys and the Polytechnic boys. I'm afraid, not NUS. NUS, I don't even, other than Olivia Lam and one or two others, I can't even think of one. Not really. So maybe you have to ask ourselves. So I think, actually, our entrepreneurs come from the ITEs, actually, frankly speaking. Now, Lawrence Wong calls it practice-oriented, ITE. So I think we have to have different levels of education. Of course, we do need the brilliant mathematicians and so on. So I think I don't believe that if we train more graduates, that there will be unemployed. I think in the case of Singapore, it is supply will attract the demand. So we just raise our competence and don't teach what Mr. Lee Kuan Yew used to call the namby-pamby subjects.
It has been suggested that with great emphasis on efficiency, there's a tendency to compromise on resilience. Because when you are focused doggedly on efficiency, you avoid failing, you avoid falling. And when you do not experience falling and failing, it's difficult for you to be truly resilient. I mean,
that's a very philosophical question.
No, it's not philosophical. No, it's not philosophical. This has been talked about, even in management, that you need to let people, you need to be prepared to let up a little bit on efficiency and meeting KPIs to allow for people to experience a little bit of chaos, a little bit of going off the track, and at least then they'll know how to get back on track if they're lost. But if you keep training them to just get there, at some point in your life when you are lost, you have no experience on how to get back on track. I mean, that's the point. I'm not saying I agree with it, I subscribe to it. I'd like to hear your view on that. Are we guilty of focusing 40 years or almost 50 years on efficiency, which may have served us exceptionally well? But are we paying a price for that today? And is it time for us to start looking at how we might be able to let up a little bit on efficiency? Is it time for us to do that, or do you think we should not?
Actually, I'm an EDB man. I would say that if we don't grow our economy, everything else is just pipe dream. Frankly speaking, you want to be more socially, fairer, you have got to have the means. Really. But I would say there's one, I would say not bad habit, but kaypoh habit of the Singapore government. I remember in Tiong Bahru, there used to be a coffee shop where we have singing birds. The old men bring
the birds.
Birds, yes, to sing every morning. It's a spontaneous thing. And one day, I don't know who, HTB or whatever, thought that we should build them a better stand, a better cage.
An air-conditioned area, maybe.
I don't know where air conditioned. Anyway, they sanitized it. In the end, the old men all went back. They never came again. So I think, and this is one lesson which Hans Sui Sen, my PERMSEC, he taught me long. As a young man, I used to be a bit kaypoh. I used to go look around and say, this is not done right, that is not done right. So you know what, he wrote to me one day, a minute to me, he said, Ngiam, leave well alone. That's a very wise, it's a very wise advice from my mentor. So the Singapore government should also learn to live well alone. And secondly, I think we should not, every time we have a problem, we set up another stat board. Stat board means only employment of civil servants. It doesn't grow the economy, Actually, it becomes a cost. So I think we should sometimes learn to be a bit, if you like, carefree, a bit untidy. Never mind. Untidy. But you should not be too kaypoh. If you want to be kaypoh, I think you over-regulate. And sometimes there's a lot of, even within the rules, civil servants can be creative. Now, I'll give you an example of creativeness in the civil service. I was PERMSEC of Ministry of Communications. And every month, some poor clerk in the ROB I'll be sent a CPIB report that this guy took a bribe because he gave a favorite number to a tauke. You want a favorite number, auspicious number, you pay the clerk, he'll make sure that you get it. So I consulted my mentor, Mr. Sim Kibun, head of civil. I said, Kibun, what do I do with this sort of thing? It recurs again and again. So Kibun told me, so Ngiam, why don't you just have a bidding system? So every month you publish on the board, these are the auspicious numbers. If you want it, can you tell me how much money you're prepared to pay for it? And lo and behold, it became transparent. And we collected a lot of revenue by this superstition, no? Auspicious number. But then I tell you the rest of that, I had a problem with my civil service. So having got the money, the Auditor General wrote to me, he says, how can you tax without a law? But luckily for me, I had Mr. Herman Hoxdat, Budget Division, Tong Dow. Why don't you look at it? There's an article called miscellaneous, isn't it? Right? You just put under miscellaneous. That solved the whole problem. So civil, we are quite flexible, quite creative. You know?
Some.
I think not. I mean, some maybe, but the point is, it can be done. Just use a grey matter a little bit, but you must consult with your fellow civil servants. Otherwise, it became very, 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 very over-regulated. I think we should avoid over-regulation. You know.
Well, I guess that's the point. I mean, it goes back to your earlier point. Besides revenue, being an EDB man, the larger point you appear to have made is we need to start having greater confidence in ourselves.
Yes, that is something which...
There's nothing wrong with bringing in talent, but at the end of the day, it should not make you less confident or less self-assured of who we are, our identity, and start becoming apologetic. I mean, that's the thrust of what you're saying.
Right.
And I guess the point here is when we are overly structured, sometimes that confidence may not come about because you need to be prepared. You need to know that when you fall, you have what it takes to stand up on your own. And that's the point, you see. So my final question is, do we still need scholars?
Of course we
No, it's a
do.
serious question. Today, see, for one thing, we want to send people on scholarship, but should they be called scholars? No, it's not a trivial question. You see, when you start labeling them as scholars, you're creating an elite. Do we need that crust? I think it's wonderful to give people scholarships.
No,
But do we need to continue with that cadre of scholars who could then be guilty of self-selection?
No, let me reply to you this way. On one of our visits to China, we were brought to the Imperial Palace. And we were brought to the Imperial Examination Hall, you know, in Beijing. So the Chinese keep very good archives, you know. They showed us the answers of all the imperial scholars throughout history, all the Zhongwen. In the initial years, they were asked to say, if your province suffers from a flood, write an essay. So this bright minds, they wrote an essay how to alleviate floods in the province. But over the years, they became quote the Confucius Analects to solve this problem. So they were too much attached to Confucianism in my view. Instead of solving practical problems, they became very literary. And once the elite become literary, I think China had it. And that's why China fell, in my view. From a very good imperial scholar system where the best young people from all the provinces and counties, they compete for this exam. But you must ask the young people the right questions. But if you just say we are testing you on your knowledge of the Confucian Analects, on precedence and so on, I think you're really emasculating their mind, in my view. Emasculating their mind. So I think our education is such that we should ask our young people the right questions. You know? And as I've said this before, I think apparently a Jewish mother, when a child comes home, the Jewish mother asks the child, son, how many questions do you ask the teacher today? Whereas the Chinese mother asks the son, what do you learn from the teacher today? Two different modes. I think that is why until today my Chinese, we are all, some of us are of Chinese descent, but there's one question which I've asked my students from China. I said, how is it the Chinese mind? We are brilliant, inventors. We invented the gunpowder, we invented the fishing hook, and so on. But how is it there's no Chinese that has come up with Einstein, the theory of relativity, Newtonian laws? I'll be very glad if somebody can tell me that in Chinese scholarship, there are such brilliant minds. So the Chinese mind, in my view, think very well within the box of orthodoxy. But when it comes to thinking outside the box, they lose hands down to the Western minds. That, I think, is the weakness of China, thinking outside the box. I don't know why. Can you think of any Chinese, in Chinese science, that somebody has come up with in history, they have come up with a real theory? I don't see any. Even Archimedes' principle, they have never discovered. So that really puzzles me. How come the Chinese are brilliant, such a brilliant race? We have not been able to come up with real new knowledge, new theories. But the Jewish race has done so. I mean, more of them. So I think the Chinese, as Chinese community here, we have got to think on why is it that we cannot think outside the box? That really is my challenge with it. It's an education system teaching where we can never think outside the box. We can give you answers. I would say that our students will score 4 A's by A's because if you give a problem within a theorem, they can score 100 marks. But if you give it outside the theorem, they will not. I've said this before at the university. I'll repeat it again. Ask 2 vice chancellors, Professor Lim Pin and Professor Shi Chun-Fong. I said, in differentiating with the first class and the honors class, the external examiners should be allowed to set 2 out of, say, 10 questions, which should be outside the curriculum that requires original thinking. 8 questions, yes, you can set within the curriculum. So the answer was no. The answer was that external examiners are just there to make sure that our students are up to the mark when it comes to this curriculum. But they are never asked, we never set questions which is outside the box. I think we should really, it's time that Singapore, our university, set questions outside the box. Then you differentiate between brilliance and competence. I differentiate between that, brilliance and competence. A brilliant mind can think outside the box, but a competent mind can just. So I think the Chinese are competent minds, but the Jewish race are brilliant minds. That's my unscientific conclusion.
Well, thank you. I think one of the reasons why the questions were not coming fast and furious is because I think some of the things you said needs time to sink in. I don't think everyone here would agree with everything you said, and I don't think that's the idea. But I think you would have planted some seeds for us to think about, reflect on, especially what you said at the end about the difference between competence, supreme competence, which doesn't amount to brilliance, right? And perhaps that is one of the challenges that Heng Swee Keat's committee needs to look at. How can we transcend the plateau of competence onto the peak of brilliance, and whether it can just be tackled without altering the socio-political landscape. I think you've given us a lot of things to think about. Thank you very much. And we have something for you. Yes, we have something for you. This is a picture of you and me.
Oh, is it? Oh,
yes.
Thank you very much.
And for some strange reason, you look better.
My interlocutor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ngiam.
Great pleasure.
And
it's
really a pleasure.
It makes me very happy
have you here.
to be with our alumni.
Thank you.
Thanks.
This is for you.
Yeah,
now
thank you.
we're going to give you something for you to sign.
Oh,
Thank you. This is the time when you will say something really nice about the experience you had tonight. You could just write something here,
Okay.
and then you can
Yeah.
read it out.
Okay.
Would you
I'll-
want to read
yeah.
it?
I'll just wish that let's grow NUS to be a strategic asset of Singapore. That's my wish.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll pass it to you later. You're going to be,
I'll be signing my own book.
he'll be signing this latest book, which makes it, what, $200 a book?
No.
A Mandarin and the Making of Public Policy. It's definitely worth reading.
Actually, most of what I said tonight can be found in this book.
Actually, he's not a good salesman. There's a lot more than what he said to me in that book, right? Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us today. There's some refreshments out there, and that's an opportunity for you to also chat further with Mr. Ngiam. Thank you. Mr. Ngiam, thank you so much.
Thanks.